Greetings, students, and welcome to chapter number 10. So let's wrap up the conversation about early childhood. So talking about ages 2 to 6, let's talk about what's going on emotionally, psychologically with our young kids. So we see here that one of the biggest achievements, if you will, for this age group is emotional regulation. So emotional regulation is when you're able to manage or handle your emotions, right? Think back when we talked about 0 to 2, and we talked about calling the 2-year-old stage the terrible twos. And the reason is because a lot of our toddlers have meltdowns, they have tantrums, as you can see in the picture here, right? And so what happens is as they get older, from 2 to 6, by the time they're starting to enter kindergarten, they're a lot better at being able to handle the feelings that overwhelm them. So when they feel overwhelmingly sad or angry or all of those things, they're able to control it a little better. Not completely, but emotional regulation. It is the biggest achievement, the most important accomplishment psychosocially or within our emotional side of us, right? In general, girls develop earlier than boys. That's just the way it is, right? So your girls will typically speak a little earlier, potty train a little earlier, and then manage their emotions a little bit earlier. It takes effort for kids to be able to control their emotions. So remember, Erik Erikson is the theorist we talk about when we talk about the psychoanalytic theory. And Erikson says this third stage, right? The first stage was trust versus mistrust. The second stage was autonomy versus shame and doubt. And the third stage is initiative versus guilt. And what Erikson says is that it's this time that kids are trying to accomplish new skills. Your 4-year-old is starting to dress themselves. They start to pick out their clothes from school. And even though the clothes don't match, you let them do it, right? So they're taking on new tasks. And with this process of taking on new tasks comes initiative. So they're taking the initiative, and when they accomplish the task, they feel really good about themselves. However, when they don't accomplish the task, they feel bad. They feel shame and they feel guilt. So let's say I have little Jimmy who's 4 or 5 years old, and we go to the grocery store, and little Jimmy says, "Mom, I'm a big boy. I can help you carry groceries in. I'm big," right? Do I give Jimmy the bag that has 2 gallons of milk in it? No, not if you're a good parent at least, right? I don't do that because I would be setting up Jimmy to fail. He would drop the bag, spill milk, and he would feel guilt. He would feel bad because he couldn't do the task or the skill he wanted to achieve. However, when I give Jimmy a bag filled with marshmallows and bread, right, he carries it to the counter for me in the kitchen, I make a big deal. "Jimmy, you're such a good helper. Oh, you're so important to mommy. Thank you so much for helping. You're so strong." I make a big deal about it, right? Because Jimmy took the initiative to try to do something, and I'm going to praise him for that initiative. And then he feels good because he actually accomplished the task. All right, so what is self-concept? Self-concept in our 2 to 6-year-olds is how the child sees themselves. So it's not only self-esteem, but it has to do with physical characteristics, with their personality, with any traits or skills that they have. I like to think of it as if you took a mirror, a handheld mirror, and you faced the mirror to you, and you looked at yourself in the mirror. What you see in the mirror is your self-concept. It's how you view yourself. So Jimmy might say, "I have curly black hair, I'm super fast, I'm great at soccer, I'm really funny," right? That might be his self-concept of how he sees himself. And in general, our young children here tend to overestimate their ability. So if Jimmy wanted to help me with groceries and he reaches for the bag that has 2 gallons of milk, And I say, no, Jimmy, I don't think that's the right bag for you. Let's try a different one. He said, no, I can do it. I can do it. Because again, they think they can do that. When it's time for bed and your child says, oh, I don't need to go to bed. I can stay up late. I can do it. But they're like yawning and they're totally tired, right? Or when it's nap time and they say, I don't need a nap. I'm a big boy, no nap. They need a nap. So they tend to overestimate what they can do. You as a parent need to be aware of what they can do. Right. So our motivation for children and adults really comes from two sources. It either comes intrinsically or from within, inside, or it comes extrinsically or from the outside. Right. So intrinsic motivation comes from within you. It's a desire. It's a self-motivation factor. However, extrinsic motivation comes from outside. So for example, my daughter is going to science camp for girls. So she's going to a junior high STEM science camp for girls because she is a science fanatic. Loves science, love environmental science. That's what she wants to do. So she goes to camp, and on the very first day, she asked all the other girls, so like, what kind of science do you guys like? And the other girls were like, our mom made us come, and she said that if I go to camp for the summer, I'm going to get a tablet. Okay, so for the friends, for the girls in the camp who I wanted a tablet, they were motivated extrinsically because there was an outside motivating factor. Mom was making you, and you were going to get a reward for coming, right? Whereas my daughter was really motivated from within. I didn't offer her any rewards for going. This is something she was dying to do, right? That's intrinsic motivation. All right, so as we talked last time, your children will typically engage in private speech. Along those lines, they like imaginary friends. So they may have a doll, a stuffed animal, or they may come to dinner one night and they may say, Mom, Susie is joining us for dinner. And you look over and there's no one there, right? And she says, Susie's gonna sit next to me for dinner. Right? Susie's her invisible friend. You as a guardian or parent are gonna say, how wonderful to have Susie for dinner. I hope Susie likes spaghetti because that's what we're having for dinner tonight. And you serve Susie some spaghetti, right? You're going to allow your child to have imaginary friends because they're healthy. Their imaginary friends, again, like private speech, it's a way for them to process and talk about what they feel. And so, thumbs up for imaginary friends. Right, this is a really fascinating slide because this slide is talking to us about different cultures or countries around the world and what those countries want their children to be able to control or handle emotionally, right? So let's look at Native Americans. So Native American culture, they want their children to overcome impatience because in the Native American culture, it is a very patient culture. They don't rush around their frenzy trying to get places. It's very laid back. That is the way they are. And so they don't want their kids to be impatient. In the Japanese culture, it's not an individualistic culture like we are here in the West. Here in the West, we tend to feel or believe that whatever you want to do, you go out and do it. Whereas in other cultures, such as Japan, you think more of the benefit of the family. So they live intergenerationally. In other words, you may have grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, you and an aunt and uncle all living in one household, right? And then maybe the family needs you to work to provide some source of income. And so you do it for the good of the family. You don't think to yourself, well, I don't really want to do that. I want to do something else for me, right? That doesn't really work. So they want their kids to overcome selfishness because they want them to be selfless. In Mexico, they want children to overcome defiance. Right? Defiance is when a child directly defies your authority. So for instance, if you tell Johnny, who's 4, Johnny, it's time for bed now. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the television. You turn off the television, Johnny looks at you and says, no. And Johnny pushes the button and turns the television back on. You say, Johnny, turn the television off now. It's time for bed. And Johnny says, no. Johnny is defying you. He's challenging your authority, right? And this is something that I am going to recommend you try to manage or handle as young as your children first display it. So if they're 2, then handle it when they're 2. If they're 4, handle it when they're 4. But if you don't manage defiance, if you allow your child, and if you say, oh, okay, Johnny, maybe 15 more minutes of TV is okay. What you've taught your child is that he can defy authority, and as he gets older, not only will he defy your authority, but he'll defy his teachers and eventually his boss, etc. So in Mexico, they expect complete obedience. When I was growing up, it didn't cross my mind to disobey my parents, right? Your parents said to do something, you were obedient. You did not defy. Here in the US, we want our children to overcome fear because we live in this kind of society or time where we do extreme sports, right? We jump out of airplanes on skateboards and land on the earth and do flips and, we do crazy sports. We want our children to be independent and strong and fearless, right? However, I'm going to argue that fear is not always a bad thing, right? Fear gives us, or it tells us, that fight or flight response. And that's important, right? There are times that we should be fearful and you should react according to that fear. And so I don't really see it as a bad thing. However, what's fascinating is just looking at what different countries value in teaching their kids what they want their children to overcome. All right, psychopathology, the definition, basically illness of the mind. We'll talk more about psychopathology when we get into emerging adulthood or young adults, ages 18 to 25. But for now, just understand it's an illness of the mind, and we'll talk about how it's just as important as physical health is. However, sometimes when we're dealing with a problem or a situation, we don't have healthy emotional regulation or control, and we may express ourselves in one of 2 ways. We either externalize or internalize. When you externalize, what that means is that you become your emotions come out. And so you may be angry and you may take something and throw it across the room. You may tell somebody off. You may just have a full-on, fit, right? That's externalizing. You're letting all of your emotions come out, not in a very healthy way. Internalizing is the opposite. Internalizing is when we take all of our emotions and we suppress them and keep them inside. So we don't show any emotion and we don't deal with it. We don't talk to anybody. We just pretend like we don't really feel those things. Neither one is healthy. What we want to teach you is when there's a problem or a situation, we want to teach you how to talk about it and how to cope with it in a healthy way that's not internalizing or externalizing. Right? However, if we had to choose between the 2 evils, if you will, we're going to say it's actually healthier for you to throw things and externalize than it is to internalize. Internalizing is like a volcano. If you continue to put all of this stuff that you feel inside and you never deal with it, it will eventually erupt. And so we would actually rather you be displaying the emotion through anger or whatever than keeping it inside. So neither one's great, but we would prefer you to externalize than internalize. And in general, girls tend to internalize and boys tend to externalize. One of the foster daughters that I had, my 12-year-old foster daughter, she came so broken to us that she internalized everything. It was so difficult even to get her to function at a conversational level, let alone talk about her feelings. She could not do it. She had been so emotionally hurt and damaged, even physically and sexually, all of those things, that she internalized all of her feelings, right? And so she needed to see a therapist because you need to work through the stuff that you feel. All right, looking at a form of maybe psychopathology, which is ADHD. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? And what we want to show you from this slide is that boys are much more likely, 3 times more likely to have ADHD than girls are. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder means the child has a difficult time, number one, sitting still. So when I used to teach 3rd grade, I would see the kids that were hyperactive and they would have a hard time sitting in their seat for 45 minutes. Their body wants to be in motion. Additionally, they had a hard time focusing. So their focused attention was really challenged. So to give them a test and say, sit here for 45 minutes and focus on the test was really hard to do. And we'll talk about how we can manage ADHD a little later. All right, play. So again, we're talking about letting your kids play. And what we find out from research is that play is really related to cultural practices and values. So, you know, back in my day, play meant going outside to play with the next door neighbor, right? You did those things. Now, today's culture is extremely different because we have handheld devices and we have screen time and we have all of these things, or different ways that kids can actually connect with people on their screen or through gaming who live in another part of the world. So there's lots of different things, but play really does reflect your culture's practices and values. Right? And our kids tend to pick kids that look like them for playmates. So in other words, you tend to pick kids from the same social class as you, income level as you, or that look like you. That's why I say it's always a good idea to get out there and take your kids to mommy and me classes or different events where they're going to be exposed to different ethnicities and different cultures of people. Right? In general, we definitely recommend no screen time under the age of 2. There's no research that screen time is beneficial in any way to kids under the age of 2. All right. When our kids do what we call competitive play, or they say, Jimmy says, Mommy, come outside and stand here because me and Johnny, we're going to race and see who wins, right? That's actually a good thing. It's a healthy thing. So when they have competition with their peers, they're learning in a healthy environment how to compete, and then learning, again, the sportsmanship of not winning, if that's the case. Right, and again, we mentioned here, no electronics under the age of 2. Another thing to be very aware of is that violent media teaches aggression. We need to be very, very careful about what our children in this age group see with their eyes. Because unlike you and I, they don't reason the same way we do. So as an example, I had a student in one of my classes one semester. Him and his wife on Sunday night, they would put they had a 5-year-old son, and they would put him to bed. And then on Sunday night, they would sit down and watch the Walking Dead program on TV. And it was, you know, I think it's a show about zombies or something like that. And so one night he said they were not aware that their son woke up. And all of a sudden they heard their son behind them. He had come into the living room and he was standing behind them. And for 10 minutes he had been watching this program, right? Probably been watching zombies eat each other or whatever, kill each other, whatever they do. And he couldn't sleep for 2 weeks because the kid is traumatized, right? Because in his mind, he doesn't understand like you and I do that. That's make-believe. That's fake. In his mind, those things are that visually, it's real and it's scary. And oh my goodness, it's not something our kids should see. And so that's why I really recommend if your child is into gaming, you need to be aware of what's in the gaming, right? My son had to be a certain age before I allowed him to do Call of Duty or any of the violent type of, you know, gaming systems or game software. So, you know, be aware of what your kids are watching. Don't just allow them to watch whatever they want, and use the programs that you don't like as a teaching opportunity. When I would sit with my kids and watch movies and I would see something I didn't like, oh my goodness, look at how she's telling her mother to shut up. That's not really nice, is it? That's kind of disrespectful the way she's talking to her mom, right? And so my kids would get the message that, you know, oh, that's not really cool. We're not supposed to treat people like that, right? Because those are important things to me, right? You need to decide what is important to teach your children. All right, morality, again, during this time, we're teaching our kids right from wrong, right? We're teaching them, you know, what we want them to understand. Is lying wrong, right? If you teach your child not to lie, then you need to be very careful because they're watching everything you do. So if one day your child says to, you know, the phone rings or you call the school and you say, you know, yeah, just to let you know, Jimmy's not going to be in school today. He's not feeling good. He's sick, so he won't be in today. And you click, hang up the phone, and Jimmy says, Mom, I thought you said we were going to the beach today. What do you mean I'm sick? Why did you tell the lady that I was sick? Right? what did you just do? You just lied in front of Jimmy, and he's not going to be able to reason that that lie is okay, but other lies are not okay, right? Lying is lying. And so you need to be very careful about that. What you teach matches your actions of what you're doing. All right, this is what we hope our kids are learning in this emotional regulation. We want them to have what we call pro-social behaviors. So we want them to learn some characteristics like sharing, being kind to people, right? Empathy. So empathy is when you can understand what your friend or someone is going through, even if you've never been through it yourself. So let's say that little Jimmy, his friend is crying on the playground because he tells him that his parents don't live together anymore, and it makes him sad. And Jimmy's parents still live together, but Jimmy has empathy, and Jimmy says, well, I feel bad for you. That's sad. I'm sorry. You want to go play? What do you want to do, right? He's showing empathy because even though he hasn't been through that, he can try to understand what his friend has been through. These are pro-social skills. We want this. Antisocial would be the opposite of pro-social. Antisocial means that our kids are deliberately doing things kind of that they shouldn't be doing, right? So they're either deliberately hurting other kids or being destructive to other kids' property or whatever it is. And as they continue in this age group, they get better at it because hopefully you're teaching them, no, Jimmy, you need to share, right? No, we can't, we don't touch other kids like that. We can't touch like that. You're teaching them those things. So hopefully, pro-social behavior instead of antisocial. And again, on the left-hand side, we see our little boys, you know, punching, pinching, pulling, you know, antisocial behavior. On the right-hand side of the screen, we're looking at our girls here. You know, one little girl is crying, and her friend it feels bad that she's crying, so she's patting her on the back, trying to comfort her, showing some empathy. All right, so aggression. Aggression manifests or shows very early in life. So there's several different forms or types of aggression. We're just going to mention here one of the most concerning types, which is actually bullying. So we've heard a lot in the last few decades about bullying and how harmful bullying can be, right? So what is bullying? It's unprovoked, meaning that you didn't ask for it. It's repeated physical or verbal, so it can be emotional, on victims that are usually smaller or younger than the bully themselves. The reason that bullying is really worrisome, concerning or worrisome, is because a bully is typically very insecure. It's a psychological issue. So think about it. If you have raised your child in what we call an affirming, healthy environment, affirming means I affirm you. I tell you I love you. I tell you you're awesome. I tell you, I point out, Jimmy, you know, how you have a wonderful sense of humor, how you're so kind that you brought mommy her slippers. Every time you do things, I praise you and I make you feel good about yourself. So when we have that kind of affirmation from our parents, we have good self-esteem. And when we have good self-esteem, we don't need to pick on people that are smaller or younger than we are. We don't need to because we're secure. When we're insecure, that is when we pick on other people. That's when we bully. So the bully actually has some psychological issues going on, right? And so it's really worrisome because it's going to take some counseling or therapy to kind of help that bully understand what the deep issues are. All right. So as caregivers or parents, right, we all fall into these 4 different dimensions. So all of us as parents do these 4 things, but we do them on different levels. Some of us are high, some of us are low. So some of us, when it comes to expressions of warmth, are you the kind of parent, or do you want to be the kind of parent that is really touchy-feely, huggy, lovey on your child, right? High expression of warmth. The other side of the spectrum would be the parent who isn't really touchy-feely. Doesn't mean they don't love their child. It just means they're a little more hands-off. So their expressions of warmth is lower. Strategies for discipline. There's some parents that are really big on discipline, right? We do a whole lot of discipline. Other parents are like, no, I pretty much don't. I let my child do what they want. I don't discipline, right? Communication. So in our relationship with our child, do we have high communication, meaning that I talk to my child and my child gets to talk to me? It's two-way. Or low communication. Maybe I just tell my child what I want them to do and that's it. They don't get to share with me how they feel about that. Expectations of maturity. So some of parents have very high expectations, right? So you have your 8-year-old child and you expect your child to do the dishes after dinner, load the dishwasher, do the laundry, and sweep the floor. A little bit too high expectations for a 7-year-old. Could your 14-year-old do those things? They could. Yeah. So you as a parent have to understand, what can my 7-year-old do? My 7-year-old can unload the dishwasher, right? That can be a chore for a 7-year-old. That's okay. But they can't do like 4 things. So we all fall into these categories and higher, low levels. All right, this is important because all of us fell into one of these 3 categories. These are the 3 different parenting styles. And so think of how you were raised when we talk about these 3. The first type of parenting style is what we call the authoritarian parent. I like to think of it as the dictator. This is the parent that tells you what to do. Right? You will do this, and if not, you're getting a spanking. Right? That's all there is to it. You don't get to talk back to me. I'm going to tell you what to do. Right? So they have a lot of high expectations. They are very stern or strict with their kids. Right? And then we have the permissive parent, which is the opposite of the authoritarian parent. The permissive parent basically does little parenting. In other words, this parent has high nurturance, meaning they're always lovey-dovey, touchy-feely. I love you, Jimmy. You're so wonderful. You're amazing, right? So they communicate, but they don't do any discipline. They don't give guidance or control. So in other words, Jimmy gets to do whatever he wants, and he's not going to get in trouble for it. Right? So when I used to teach in elementary school, I could spot kids that were raised in a permissive parenting home, because these are the kids that don't have self-control, because mom or dad let them do whatever they want. And so if I said, okay, kids, it's time to sit down, we're going to go into science stations, right? And, this Jimmy would just get up and start bouncing around the room. And I would say, Jimmy, it's time to sit down. It's science time, and he would pretty much ignore me, and then I'd ask again, okay, Jimmy, that's the second warning. It is time to sit down. I'm going to have you go visit Mr. So-and-so in the principal's office, and Jimmy just didn't care. And when I would talk to mom or dad and say, I've noticed that Jimmy is really kind of struggling to have some self-control and to engage with the class when it's time for science or math or whatever, the parent will say, well, he's only in 3rd grade. What's the big deal? Right? The parent will make excuses for why Jimmy's okay not following the rules, because the parent allows Jimmy to do whatever he wants, and that's not healthy parenting at all. We'll talk about that. The parenting style that we should aim for is what we call authoritative parenting. Authoritative parenting means I have rules and I have structure, right? So I have curfew for my kids. They have do's and don'ts in the home, all that kind of thing. But I'm flexible, and I listen to my children. There's 2-way communication, and I am nurturing and loving with my kids, right? So it does have structure, because believe it or not, kids like structure. Yeah. So we've done research on kids, and if we took 100 kids and we put them in a playground, and the playground had a play set in the middle, and it had a fence around the playground, and we said, here you guys go. You guys go ahead and go on the playground and have fun. Play and do whatever you want. The kids had a wonderful time. They were playing on the playground. They were within the gate, right? However, if we did the same thing with those 100 kids, and we took those 100 kids and we said, there's a play set right over there, but there was no fence or gate around the play set. And we put the 100 kids there and we said, go ahead, have a good time and play, do whatever you want to do. What we found is that all of the kids kind of pretty much got on the play set and didn't really go out down the field to play soccer or to do those things. And the reason was because they didn't understand where's the boundary. Like, how far out can I go? Because when I have boundaries, when they have a fence or a gate around them, they feel safe. And so in our home, when your kids know the rules, when they know the rules, they have some sense of security in those rules. And so rules are not a bad thing, right? However, we do need to be flexible with our rules. All right, so this is kind of what it looks like in this parenting styles. Authoritarian parent. And I was raised by authoritarian parents. I love my parents, they're wonderful, but we came from a culture that just expected complete obedience. So they weren't really touchy-feely, lovey, saying you're wonderful, all those things. They didn't really do that. So for authoritarian parents, warmth is pretty low. Discipline is very strict. So we have a paddle, right? I know I have these boy cousins, and when I would go visit their home, it would always scare me, because when I would go visit their home, as soon as you walked into the front door, there it was, hanging next to the front door. It was the paddle, right? It was this long wooden paddle, and it had holes in it, because apparently the more holes in the paddle, the harder it would hit and hurt. And I remember one time I went over, my boy cousins had done something wrong. And so they were crying, and they were saying, when Dad gets home, we know we're getting a spanking, and he's got like 4 hours before he gets home. So they had like 4 hours to stress out about the spanking that was coming, right? So that's authoritarian parenting. Their expectations of maturity are very high. So they expect their kids to perform at very, very high levels. And again, their communication is always the parent talking to the child. Permissive parents, kind of the opposite, right? Permissive parent, lots of touchy-feely, huggy, Jimmy's wonderful, I love Jimmy, right? Discipline is rare. They just don't discipline their kids, right? Expectations of maturity is low. So in other words, Jimmy's like, 17, a senior in high school, he's going to go off to college, and Jimmy still doesn't know how to clean his room. He doesn't know how to, get cereal by himself. He doesn't know how to do anything, because mom, dad, or guardian have been doing all those things for him. And so he's going to have problems because he doesn't know how to do things, right? And the communication is usually Jimmy, the child, telling the parent what to do. So basically, Jimmy says, you know what, I want McDonald's for dinner tonight. And the parent goes, okay, we'll have McDonald's for dinner tonight. Oh, you know what, I don't want to go to school today. Okay, well, I'll call in sick for you. Okay, right? So again, not a healthy structure. Authoritative parenting, which is the one we want, right, has high warmth, because we know from research that physical touch is loving. When we touch people, like say you have a good friend and they're sad about something, and you just don't say anything, but you go give them a hug, and you crack their back and give them this really awesome hug, that touch is very loving. It communicates that. And so that warmth is high. Discipline is moderate, meaning that if my child does something to break the rules, they are disciplined for it. But we're going to talk about what they did wrong. What can they do better next time, right? Expectations for maturity are moderate, meaning I understand what my kids can do at that age. And then communication is two-way. So we both communicate a lot. Right? This is kind of what it looks like. And then as these kids grow into adults, so the children of authoritarian, and I'm going to tell you right now for the exam, you're going to have to figure out a system to keep number 1 and number 3 separate, because students get them mixed up on the exam. And I don't know why they labeled them or named them so close to each other. The authoritarian is the dictator. The authoritative is the one that we aspire to be. So kids who have authoritarian parents who are more dictator style, they seem very strict and stern. These kids are obedient because they're afraid of their parent, because there's a paddle sitting over there, right? They're afraid of punishment, so they're very obedient. However, as they grow into adulthood, they become very depressed, and these are typically the kids that say, man, when I turn 18, I'm out of here. Because these parents have not allowed their children to kind of express themselves and be or do what they want to do. They've always told them what to do. And these kids are going to rebel or get out of that situation when they can, right? Children of permissive parents are actually more concerning, because these people, become very unhappy in life. They lack self-control, right? Remember we said they are allowed to do whatever they want. So what happens is they can't hold down a job because when your boss says, you know what, that report is due tomorrow by 5 o'clock and you don't do it. And your boss says, I didn't get that report by 5 o'clock yesterday. And you say, well, yeah, I think Friday's good. I could probably have it done by Friday. And your boss kind of says, well, you could probably go find another job where you can have it done by Friday, right? So they lose their jobs because they don't have self-control and they don't like to be told what to do because mom or dad or guardian never did that for them, right? So these are the kind of people or kids that when they grow up, they're 40 and they live at home. They live at home because, you know what, mom does my laundry and she cooks for me. Why would I want to go get an apartment or have a girlfriend or a boyfriend? That's too hard, too much work, right? I got mom here who takes care of everything, right? So it's not healthy. And then children of authoritative parents, who that's the one we want to aspire to, they are very successful and happy because we've taught our kids self-esteem. We've affirmed them by saying positive words to them. We've taught them to that there is structure, that your teacher has expectations. You know, like for my kids, you know, if you got in trouble at school, you were in trouble at home, because I taught them that, you know, the rules that we have at home apply to your teachers and the authority at school, because eventually you're going to have a boss you answer to one day. And so this is the ideal type of parenting. All right, so punishment. Let's talk about punishment, specifically physical punishment, what we call corporal punishment. So we're talking about spanking. Yeah, when we talk about corporal punishment, we usually are talking about physically doing something. And you're going to find that in general, cultures really differ on what they consider appropriate punishment or not. Raised in my culture, it was appropriate for my uncle or for my relatives to spank their kids. That was appropriate. That was just the way we disciplined, right? Other cultures, you don't touch kids in those ways, right? You do other things to discipline. So really, when you think about you as a parent or when you become a parent, the way you choose to discipline your child is going to be greatly based on what you saw growing up, your own personality or temperament, right? Some parents are very laid back parents. Others are pretty, you know, strict and stern or high pressure parents. All of those things are going to play into how you decide that you want to discipline your kids. So what we're going to say about spanking, I'm going to say a couple things about spanking in general. Number one, is it legal? Is it legal today to spank your kids here in California? Yes or no? It is. I have a right to spank my child. What I cannot do by law is I cannot leave a mark. I cannot leave anything, a welt or anything on my child, because, again, for those of you who aspire to the nursing program or to any of the health science programs or teaching or whatever it be, you will be mandated reporters. You will be required by law to report if you suspect abuse in any way. And when a child shows up in the emergency or shows up at the doctor's office and they have a welt or a mark on any part of their body, you need to report that. And so as a parent, I can't do that. I can't do that. So you can spank, but you can't leave a mark. Remember, if you choose spanking, if you choose to do that, now this is what I'm going to say. Number one, I already said before, have the female spank. Because men don't understand their strength. I think it's children have, you know, a little bit of fat, not enough to really maybe ward off or protect them from the force of a man's hand or a belt or whatever it be. So I would say number one, females should be doing the spanking. And number two, you need to remove the anger that you feel with the discipline, right? So let me give you an example. So when my youngest was a baby, she was under a year old. One day she was sitting in her high chair and she was eating her Gerber baby food, right? So she was probably like 9, 10 months old. And so she's sitting there eating her Gerber baby food, or I'm kind of feeding her. And my son, who's, you know, he's already, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, I forget. My kids are like spread out. And my son comes up and he wants to go play outside. And I tell my son, I can't right now. Can't play outside right now because I got to finish feeding your sister. A little later this afternoon, we can go play outside. So my son is angry, right? So he's angry that we don't get to go play. So I turn around to go do something. And what happens is my son is angry my son takes a fork and he picks up the fork. And my daughter, my baby daughter, is sitting in her high chair and she's sitting there, eating. And my son takes the fork and he goes like this. Okay. All of a sudden I hear screaming. There is blood splurting out. And I see my daughter just wailing and screaming. And I see my son just standing there, guilty with the fork. Right? No, I love my son. I really do. But at that point in time, I wanted to pitch him under a moving vehicle, right? I'm mad. I'm angry. I have a daughter who's yelling off the wig. I'm angry, right? So this is what happens is parents are angry, and what they do in that moment is they grab the belt or they grab the paddle or they take their hand, pick up the child, and they spank. And so with that comes your anger and your energy in that anger. And that's not what we want for spanking, right? So what I had to do in that moment is send my son to his room. You need to go to your room right now, right? You need to get away from me. And then I tend to my daughter and I deal with all of that, right? And then I need to go take a break. Mom needs to calm down and I need to separate my anger from the discipline that needs to happen. That's what I need to do, right? And so after you've calmed down, then you go and you get your child, right? I went and got my son. And what I recommend is if you're going to spank, you need to go to a neutral location. So in other words, don't spank your child in their bedroom, because their bedroom is a place of safety and security and peace. And so I recommend like an office or the bathroom or someplace that's a neutral location. And I'm going to take my son and I'm going to have a conversation first. Son, what happened? I was mad. So what did you do with your anger? I hurt my sister. Are we supposed to hurt each other? Are we allowed to hurt each other? No, right? How do you feel about that now? He kind of doesn't know what to say, right? Well, I don't know, right? Well, son, let's talk about that. We got to talk about our feelings and talk about how we feel about it, because it's not okay. Now, how would you feel if your older sister came and did something like that to you, right? So we have a conversation, and then I spanked my son, right? And after I did that, I hold him, and he's crying, and I'm holding him, and I'm rocking him, and I'm loving him, and I'm telling him, I love you, and I'm saying, what would we do next time? What can we do next time that you feel angry like that, right? And I'm going to teach him how to cope with his emotion in the future so it doesn't happen again. I tell him I love him, we hug, I sit there as long as needed, right? And then it's over and we never talk about it again. Okay? So this is where parents go wrong, is they don't separate their feelings from the discipline that needs to happen, if you choose that, right? With my youngest daughter, she just never needed a spanking, right? Just never kind of did any of those actions. It's up to you how you discipline, but discipline is part of child rearing. All right. So the most common form of discipline is time out. So timeout is basically taking our child or removing our child from a situation and putting them someplace maybe they don't want to be. As you see here, sometimes we put our kids on the wall. I have girlfriends that used to have their kids lay on their bed faced up looking at the ceiling, and they couldn't move or do anything, right, during timeout. My recommendation for timeout is that the length of timeout should be according to their age, because they really can't handle a lot more. So for instance, if my daughter was 4, and she did something wrong that she needed time out, I would take her and I would actually do like this. I would put her facing the wall. She can have no toys or anything like that. She has to stand there for 4 minutes because she's 4 years old. She's going to stand for 4 minutes. And for her, believe it or not, those 4 minutes feel like an hour. Okay. I'm going to caution you to be careful with making sure that you kind of abide by that timeline. I remember one time I put my daughter on the wall. I then got busy, like we all do, with dishes and housework and all the things I need to do. And 45 minutes later, I hear screaming coming down the hall, wailing and screaming. And I had forgot my kid. I forgot her on the wall. So 45 minutes, she's been sitting there on the wall. But when you go back to get your kid, you have a conversation. So I always recommend actually getting down, like getting on your knees to eye level with your kids, right? I used to do this when I taught elementary school. Because I think if you think about it, kids are always looking up because you as the adult have the power. You're the big person. And so they're always kind of looking up at you. So when I want to communicate something important to my kids, I would always get on my knee and I'm at eye level and then I'm going to talk to them. And so I would get on my knee at eye level and I would say, so what did we do wrong? What happened? What can we do better next time? Okay, hugs and kisses. I love you bunches. It's over. We don't talk about it again. Right? So I think that's kind of maybe a effective method for using the timeout discipline technique for your kids. All right, so this is not in your book, but these are a couple of different parenting tips, 101 kind of thing. These are traps that we fall into, and we need to be very careful if you want to raise well-adjusted kids, which I think most of us do, right? The first one is accidental rewards for misbehavior. So this is when, have you ever been in the checkout line or at the grocery store and you see a kid having a full-on screaming fit because he wants the Milky Way bar? I want that candy. And mom is saying, no, you can't have the candy. No, you can't have the candy. And he is just screaming and wailing. The line is long. It's embarrassing. And then eventually, what do you see? Mom kind of goes, fine, here, shut up, have the candy, right? What mom did was an accidental reward for misbehavior, right? Because what happened was your child was acting like you didn't want them to. They were having a fit in the store for a candy bar. You said no. They continued to have a fit. But by giving them the candy bar, you actually rewarded them for the misbehavior. So what happens is next time you go to the store, what have they learned? Remember, behaviorism teaches kids. They learn that behavior, even though mom said no, I eventually got my candy bar, right? So I'll do it again. So we don't want to reward kids for misbehavior. The next one is the escalation trap. This is when you as the parent get all worked up and stressed out because your child doesn't obey you the first time. So let's say you go in and it's nighttime and you go in and you say to Johnny, okay, Johnny, it's going to be time for a bath before bed. So go ahead and pick up your toys now. Right? Johnny goes, okay. And you leave the room and nothing happens. You come back to the room and it's like, your voice is a little higher. Johnny, did you not hear me? I said it's time for us to get ready for a bath. So you need to pick up your toys right now. So Johnny kind of looks at you and goes, okay. And he puts like 3 blocks into the toy box, right? And then you leave, right? So now you come back again, and what happens is Johnny's still sitting there. The only thing in the toy box is the 3 blocks he put in last time you were here. Now you're yelling. You're like, Johnny, that's it. I said, if you don't get it up right now, that's it. You're right. You are all stressed out and worked up, and you have escalated. And so what's happened is Johnny has learned that until mom or guardian is at the level of yelling and escalation, she's not really going to do anything to me. I'm not really going to get in trouble or anything, right? So he waits until you're at that level. So you should never have to say things like, don't make me count to 3, because the first time you say to your child, Johnny, it's time for us to, put our toys away to get in the bath, you should have a relationship that they obey. Now, my advice to parents, and this is where I think parents might go wrong, my advice is that you give Johnny a heads up, right? So 10 minutes before it's time to get in the bathtub, you come in and say, okay, Johnny, just to let you know, we got about 10 minutes before we have to start putting our toys away to take our bath, right? Because now Johnny has an idea. Because think of it from Johnny's perspective. What if Johnny was in the middle of building some awesome fort with his blocks? And you come in and go, all right, Johnny, put your toys away. It's time for a bath. And he's like, what? I'm like building something here. So giving him the 10-minute heads up helps him to kind of process this. Ignoring good behavior. We tend to do this even in our romantic relationships because as humans, we are very critical. We tend to see the negatives before we see the positives. And so ignoring good behavior, don't do that because you get your kids to continue good behavior if you praise it, right? So I remember one time, one of my daughters just hated PE. Like she was a frilly girls girl, and so she hated it. She would come home telling me, I hate baseball. No, why do we have to do PE? I'm not good. I don't like it. Da, da, da. So she hated it. And one day I get a phone call home from the PE teacher. And I answer the phone, and it's the PE teacher, and he's there, and I'm flipping out because I'm thinking, did she get hurt? What happened? What's going on? I never get a phone call home, from school. And he says, well, you know what? I just wanted to tell you that, Madeline has had a wonderful attitude. Her attitude has been I know she's struggling to hit the ball, but you know what? She comes in with a positive attitude, and I'm really proud of her because she tries every time, right? And I'm just kind of like, this is weird. This is new. I don't get lots of phone calls home for that, right? And so when my daughter gets home from school, you betcha she's going to get a reward. She's going to get to go have dinner wherever she wants, because I love it when my kids, even if they can't do something, have a good attitude about it. And so if somebody praises that, I'm going to say to her, honey, you did awesome. You may not have hit the ball yet, but you have a good attitude and you're trying that effort. I'm going to reward that effort, because then she'll do it more and more and more, right? Giving too many instructions or too few, right? So, and this is different for boys and girls too a little bit. So for instance, when my daughter was 6, both my girls, when they were 6, I used to be able to say, okay, honey, girls, I want you to go, we're going to go visit grandma. So I want you to go put on your shoes, grab your jacket, grab your lunch pail on the counter, and meet me by the front door. And my girls would go 1, 2, 3, 4, and they were waiting by the front door. Now my son is 6, and I'm going to go, son, I want you to put on your shoes, grab your jacket, grab the lunch pail, meet me by the front door. 5 minutes later, he's still in the same spot I left him. Son, do you remember to put on the shoes, jacket, lunch, front door, right? 5 more minutes, and he's still there trying to put on one shoe, right? He just couldn't, there was too many instructions. So what I learned with my child is I would say, son, can you put on your shoes, please? And then come see me when you're done. And my son could do that. He would go put on his shoes, and then he would come back, and I could say, now, son, would you go grab your jacket, right? He could go grab his jacket. Son, would you go grab the lunch pail? He could do one at a time. It just depends on your child's maturity, their age level, and what they have kind of going on. So that was too many instructions. Too few instructions for a child is if I said something like, honey, go get ready. We're going to go visit grandma. So go get everything ready. Your child will look at you like, what does that mean? What does it mean, get everything ready? I don't know. Does that mean go get shoes on? I really don't know what that means. That's too few instructions. So being careful to fall into, give the explicit, correct a number of instructions for your child. And then making sure that when you threaten something, you follow through. So let's say your child gets into trouble and you say, you know what, tomorrow, no Dora, no screen time, no cartoons tomorrow, right? And so what happens is tomorrow comes around and now your child has no screen time. So who do you think they want to play with if there's no screen time? You. And so you're trying to do 1,000 different jobs, things you need to get done, and your child is constantly, let's go outside and play ball. Let's play Barbies. Let's do this. Let's do that. And eventually you go, okay, you know what? Go ahead. Let me turn on Dora for you, right? What happens is your child learns that even though you say something, you don't mean it. And you don't want that, because you need your child to know your word is your word, whatever that be, right? All right, so, and then again, looking here at how we teach our children, our boys, our girls, in early childhood, ages 2 to 6, about the difference between sex and gender, right? Have you ever been to Toys R Us or Babies R Us and you walk in and you go, oh, there's the pink section, that's the girls. There's the blue section, that's the boys. As a society, we have prescribed what it means to be in those categories, right? And so as you see in this picture, why is it that my daughter can't work in construction? Why is it that my son couldn't be a belly dancer, right? Well, why is it that we say only girls can do this or only boys can do that? And so children learn these stereotypes very early on. So to be more neutral in explaining that. And here we see kind of the definitions of the difference, right? So when I talk about sex, I'm talking about the biological reproductive parts that you were born with. Were you born with a penis or a vagina? One of them means you're male, one of them means you're female, right? That's sex. When we talk about gender, gender's different, because gender is, remember we talked before about how race is socially constructed, so is gender. Gender means what does it look like here in the US for us to be feminine or masculine, right? What do we view as being feminine, right? I'm sure you've all had friends or had people that, you know, they may have been male, but they had maybe feminine tendencies, or female that had masculine tendencies. And we don't say there's anything wrong with that. However, as a society, sometimes we do, right? Sometimes we do. And that's what we mean is differences between sex and gender. And understand that most of our kids actually identify with a gender. In other words, even if you're male, you may identify in more of the female gender at an early age, right? 5 or so. Children have already kind of had those feelings and expressions. All right, so Sigmund Freud, right? Sigmund Freud says that children in this third developmental stage go through what he calls the Oedipus complex. It's kind of weird, right? But the Oedipus complex basically says, and these are for boys only, the Electra complex is for girls, means the same thing, but for boys only. The Oedipus complex says, I want to off dad. And the reason I want to off dad is because I want all of mom's attention. So think of it from your child's perspective. Let's say you're home with your child, or you spend all of your time with your child. They love you, you're their favorite person, and then dad comes home from work. And all of a sudden, mom starts kissing dad, and they start talking and having conversation. And well, I still want to play with mom, and dad seems to be taking her attention away from me. And so it's kind of this unconscious desire of a child to want to get rid of or kill their dad so that they can have mom all to themselves. And then they feel guilty about these feelings. And they feel guilty because they can really understand dad, right? Because they're saying to themselves, well, gosh, I love mom so much. She's so awesome. I can kind of understand why dad likes her too, right? That's how they kind of deal with that, by identifying with their dad, right? And again, for girls, it's the Electra complex, in which girls feel that way about wanting their father's attention. All right. So make sure to go ahead and go through our clicker slides here for this really interesting chapter on rearing or disciplining or raising or parenting our young kids. And I will see you next time as we get into middle childhood. Oh, goodness.